Albert Breer is at the Spring League meeting. What are you hearing about this, Albert?
You know, Rich, I think it makes sense what you're saying, and I know that at least the feeling is that that LA is going to go along with the league's directive on this. And, you know, there are concerns about the idea of doing it in year one. Part of that's security. Part of that's working out the kinks of the stadium. Yes, there would be 20 games there in year one, and that's essentially 2 NFL seasons for a stadium. But, you know, there's also the flip side of this, which is that they want to be in the rotation. You know, like they want to have the game there every 4 or 5 years the way it was in the 80s and the 90s. And I think that everybody who's in that position looks at Dallas and sees how much Dallas invested in their stadium and how things going wrong at a Super Bowl can prevent you from getting another one. And so I think a big part of this for LA is, yes, we'd like to have Super Bowl 55, but if Super Bowl 56 is going to give us a better chance to have a better event, which will put us in a position to be in the rotation and have the Super Bowl here every 4 or 5 years, then maybe we should just go ahead and do it that way.
And plus, Albert, I mean, I haven't met a single person in Los Angeles who's like trying to force it to happen or wants it to happen or got disappointed that it's not going to happen for Super Bowl 55. It does not affect the Los Angeles Olympic bid at all. So if that's the case, who might get Super Bowl 55?
The group that was the runner-up was Tampa, you know, and so they would make some sense. You know, obviously it would take some doing at this point. You got to work out things with hotels and, you know, they'd be working on a little bit of a short clock, but it's still 3.5 years away. So I think Tampa would be near the top of the list. The obvious one that I think we'd all love to see would be New Orleans, but my understanding is that they're booked up for that week in 2021. And so my guess is that it would be Tampa. Again, like to me, New Orleans would be the logical one if they weren't booked. And I think almost certainly it would have to be a city that's had it before to work on a little bit of short notice on this one.
Are we going to hear about it today, you think? Tomorrow? What do you think?
You know what? Like, well, what I can tell you is that it was not on the agenda coming in here, and it was not on the agenda this morning. But my guess is that it will come up in the room, and, you know, it's going to be sort of, you know, the ball's going to be in the court of Stan Kroenke and Kevin Demoff, and you know, however they want to work this out could dictate where things go. You know, if they've made the decision, like you said, that, you know, we're willing to step aside and stand down and wait until 2022 to have the Super Bowl, then maybe it could be resolved that quickly. You know, if there's a waiver process they're going to go through, obviously that's something else.
Is it possible, Albert, as you're in Chicago, the irony that you're walking on Michigan Avenue while you're talking to me? Is that entirely possible?
I'm walking on LaSalle Avenue. I've avoided my hotel's on Michigan Avenue, though.
Well,
my hotel is on Michigan Avenue.
Is it at least on the corner of Michigan and Ohio for you, Albert?
It is not. It is not. So, and maybe that's why yesterday when I went out for my run, I was exhausted coming off the plane, wanted to go out, get a run in.
Sure.
Give myself some energy, all of that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I was dragging my feet. I kicked a rock.
Okay.
I tripped. My knee basically exploded, and my iPhone cracked. So that's what I get for staying on Michigan.
Hold on a minute. Are you calling in hurt right now? Is that what you're saying?
Well, actually, the good people at the Apple Store on Michigan Avenue, further down Michigan Avenue,
I know where that is.
Were able to take care of my iPhone, so they were able to replace the glass.
What about your knee?
But yeah, I had a little bit of a rough start to this trip, and I'm not going to say it did, but I also don't know that it didn't have anything to do with the fact that I'm staying on Michigan Avenue.
Okay, well, I'm sure whatever it is, whatever you thought it was on that avenue, whatever you thought you tripped on, I'm sure you wound up 1 inch shy of it, Albert, when you really thought you didn't. Okay. Does that make sense?
Well. Hey, you know, I tend to look at scoreboards in those situations.
Shall we move on, Albert Breer of the MMQB? So why the change in overtime rule? Why?
Well, you know, I think there's a hidden thing here. Now, the obvious would be to cut down on the number of plays, right? Like that they've, you know, put in all these health and safety measures, and that this would cut down the amount of potential plays. That makes sense, and that's part of it. There's another element here, though, too. And I remember I remember talking to Bill Belichick about this probably 10, 12 years ago. And, I remember bringing up the idea of the college overtime. And do you like the college overtime? And he said no. And the reason why he didn't like it is because he felt like it marginalized special teams. And I said, well, that's interesting. So why do you feel so strongly about that? And he said, well, I feel like the game in overtime should be played like the game's played in the four quarters. And so, his point was, if we really wanted to do that, then maybe we should go to just playing a full period and playing a period out, an overtime period out. And to me, this is a step in that direction where you are introducing the clock as an element from the beginning of the overtime period, where it's something that's a piece of the strategy of all of it from the start, and that makes it more like the rest of the game. So the health and safety thing is absolutely a part of it, but I think an interesting little kind of, whether it's a side benefit or something they really kind of thought about, that little thing there, I think, the idea of introducing a clock as an element in overtime from the time that they kick the ball off, I think is something that shouldn't be ignored.
So Belichick is going to be the first one to maybe institute an NBA-like 2-for-1 possession concept for overtime, assuming he's going to get the ball back after he rushes his first attempt.
We know he's going to do some wacky stuff. I think you immediately. Well, I mean, if you're getting the ball at the beginning of overtime, aren't you immediately wouldn't you run the play clock down from the start?
Right. I guess the idea would be to try and grind it out, get yourself a 7-8 minute long possession, but then at some point inside the red zone, you're going to have to make the decision: do I kick the field goal here and allow them the ability to try and time you with a field goal? Because somebody's going to want to do that rather than lose a game. Or do you?
And that's why I think that's what I think is cool about this. Is that like the rest of the game, the clock is an element. And that's in the first quarter, the third quarter, the same as it is in the second and the fourth quarter. It's just it's part of the game. And the way overtime was, I mean, yes, it's a part of the game, but it doesn't really doesn't become a part of the dynamic of overtime until you get further in. Like now, the way that they'll do it from the start of overtime, the clock's going to be an element right away. And I just think that if part of that is to make it like the other four quarters and more like the game conditions you would have in regulation, then that makes sense.
Albert Breer joining me here on the Rich Eisen Show for a couple more minutes. So is this a one-year deal? They're just kicking the tires on the overtime rule? Or
yeah.
Okay, so just 1 year. We'll see.
This will be. But I mean, honestly, here's the thing, right? We don't see enough overtime. I mean, I don't know what the numbers are, but there aren't a ton of overtime games. It's hard for me to see a scenario where enough is going to go wrong in year one where they wouldn't just go forward with it. So, I can't imagine what scenario. However many overtime games we have, whatever it is, 10, 15, it's hard to envision a scenario where something goes wrong and repeats itself enough times where they would decide, okay, we're going back to 15 minutes in 2008.
Well, and in that respect, to wrap up our conversation with the celebration rule that's put in there, I said in the second hour of the show that the Ezekiel Elliott jump into the Salvation Army tureen that was in the back of the Cowboys end zone was kind of like the Hail Mary moment for the NFL, where everybody was talking about something in the fan base, and something finally turned fan sentiment in such a negative way that the league felt they had to do something. But then I'm seeing the commissioner spoke to 80-some-odd guys over the non-playing season over the course of this. What's the genesis of the change of heart here on celebrations, Albert?
Okay, so I think it's two things. One, common sense, right? Like, I think when we saw the Zeke celebration, we all knew, like, yeah, that might be outside the definition of the rule, but I mean, come on, so there's a common sense element to this. The other thing, and this is to me a broader thing that's been kind of a topic the whole offseason. I mean, think about this, Rich. Like, over the last 7 or 8 years, like, how often have you thought about how often have you felt like the players and the owners and the league and the commissioner were all on the same page? Not very often, right?
Right.
Like almost never since the lockout. It just feels like they've always been at each other's throats. And this is part of a concerted effort by the commissioner and the league to try to give the players some ownership back in the game and try to say to them, this is your game too. We're all doing well. This is a partnership, and we want to start working in that direction. And to me, the celebration thing is what it is. It'll make the game more fun. There's a common sense element. But I think the kind of bigger, broader story here is the league trying now to make it so the players know, hey, you're our partners here, and we think it makes sense to work together on things like this. And I think you're going to see more of that going forward, too, beyond just, the celebration thing or having Brandon Marshall at the owners' meetings in March. It's just, I think you'll see more and more of that as we go forward. And obviously it would be good to see, with the CBA up in 4 years.
Albert, you take care of yourself. Thanks for the knowledge from Chicago, including the fact that next time I'm on Ohio Street, I should leave my cell phone in the hotel room. Thank you for that information.
Absolutely. And in late November.
Albert Breer, thank you for calling in.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on radio stations across the country and audience.
If you like that video, be sure to download our app. Don't have any memory on your phone? Let's start to delete some of those slow-mo videos you have. And you know which ones I'm talking about.